signs seen in BSE are changes in behavior. These include general apprehension, tremors, head shyness, fine muscle fasciculations, kicking in parlour, hyper-responsiveness to touch or sound, nervousness of doorways, increased vocalization, and changes in social behaviour.
The Agriculture Minister, John Gummer, today enrolled his daughter Cordelia in his campaign to persuade people that eating beef is safe. It was a little hot for her. But later he munched it himself to prove to the world that he at least is confident there's nothing to worry about.
When you've got the clear support of the scientists who deal with these matters, the clear support of the Department of Health, the clear action of the government, there is no need for people to be worried, and I can say perfectly honestly that I shall go on eating beef as my children will go on eating beef, because there is no need to be worried. Now, you can't do anything more than that.
In another effort to calm people's fears, Mr Gummer's ministry will next week publish a pamphlet outlining what is known about BSE and answering some of the key questions. Today, the government's chief medical officer lent his support to official efforts to restore confidence in beef.
There is no risk associated with eating British beef, and that everyone, children, adults, patients in hospital, can be quite confident that it's safe to eat beef.
This latest panic is bound to hit beef sales. It was triggered last week by the discovery that a cat has developed a disease similar to BSE. No one knows how the cat got ill, but it was enough to trigger renewed public concern. That led the Commons Agriculture Committee today to decide to set up its own inquiry into BSE and the way the government has handled the crisis.
Given the great disquiet, the harm to the industry, the concern of parents, the whole question is sufficiently important for us to seek to come up with the right answer.
Among the questions the committee will look into is whether calves born to BSE cows are safe. Some vets think they shouldn't be used for breeding, though the ministry has not officially given a view on that. At a government experimental farm in Cambridgeshire, calves born to BSE cows are being studied for signs of disease. Cows caught the disease from eating sheep offal infected with a disease called scrapie. It was thought the disease would not cross from one species to another. It has happened before, though. 40 years ago, mink in America caught a similar disease from eating scrapie-infected sheep meat. The fear is that BSE might lead to a form of dementia in humans known as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. But most experts believe it's not possible to catch the disease from eating beef.
The oral route is an extremely inefficient way of transmitting the disease from one species to another. So I don't think there is in practice any risk at all.
A few scientists want the government to take tougher action, and the government still has a crisis of confidence on its hands. Today, several more education authorities, including here on the Isle of Wight, took British beef off the menu. They too want more evidence that British beef is safe.
Take your tongue out, go on.
Go on.
Go on, put a face.
My name's Christine Lord. My 24-year-old son is upstairs in my bedroom dying of the human form of mad cow's disease. I'm extremely angry that this tragedy has happened to my fit, young, handsome son, and I want some answers, and I want to find out who was responsible for killing my son.
I rather conclude that there is a linkage, although it's obviously not proven at the present time. We have eaten somewhere in the region of 750,000 infected cattle. Fortunately, the vast majority of those would be early stage incubation, but some, many thousands, will have been near end stage incubation and therefore high infectivity. About 2/3 of them were eaten before the offals ban came into effect. So we as a population in this country have had a high dose of this infectious disease.
Is British beef safe, do you think?
Absolutely, it always has been.
I've no doubt about that at all.
Even throughout the worst of BSE, you would still insist that British beef was safe?
I would be perfectly happy that British beef was safe, and it's rather important to me because I live in the country, my family live in the country, my grandchildren live in the country, and I have no concern about their health from beef itself. What is true is that historically, even before the disease was recognised, there would be some parts of cattle going into the food chain, particularly from the central nervous system, which could well have carried infectivity, but that's a very different thing than talking about the safety of beef. All the evidence is that the agents which cause these diseases do not appear in the muscle in any species.
I'm a bit gloomy on the transmission of CJD of BSE to humans. It seems to me that it's much better to be gloomy at this stage because very often in these health matters, although you can be too extreme, it is very dangerous to be complacent.
For farmer Neil Manning, there are more pressing issues than the race to discover the link or otherwise between BSE and CJD. Like most British dairy and beef farmers, he's too many cows on his farm. As part of the government's measures against BSE, over 500,000 cows aged over 30 months have been culled since May. But the sheer volume has created a blockage in the system, and cows that are disposing of dead cows is overloaded. The carcasses of the cows slaughtered in the over 30-month cull, the first and so far the only BSE-inspired cull in Britain, are stained yellow and transported to one of Britain's licensed rendering plants. It's here rather than the abattoirs that the blockage is so acute. Nationwide, up to 15,000 cows a week are currently being processed, putting a strain on the renderer's normal working capacity. To relieve the pressure, the Ministry of Agriculture plans to find additional cold storage for the cows that have already been slaughtered in the abattoirs. At least 4 grain warehouses are currently being converted to stockpile the carcasses that are waiting for rendering. But with nearly 500,000 cows lying idly on the farms, clearly these measures aren't enough.
The choke point has been the renderers, and by reducing the proportion of the carcass that has to be rendered, and by taking on more cold storage facilities, we can increase the throughput weekly. We hoped up to around 55,000, and so we would hope to be able to clear the backlog by around Christmas. That is our hope.
But the whole cull issue has become a political battlefield where anti-European politicians in Britain's governing Conservative Party can and probably would defeat the extended cull policy in the House of Commons. They and a large number of their constituents believe the European Union is ignoring the scientific rationality of the BSE issue, instead threatening Britain's multi-billion-pound beef industry for the benefit of its other member states.
Well, I think as time goes by, one finds a cause for concern as to what the cull is about. And if it's about appeasing Europe and not about scientific evidence and fact, then I would be very, very concerned about the implications of that, and I would take that into account in deciding how I voted.
It's here at Oxford's Centre for the Epidemiology of Infectious Disease that the government found the scientific evidence it wanted and needed to hear to make a no-extended cull policy sound reasonable. Professor Roy Anderson and his research team looked at the epidemiology of BSE in cattle. The peak of infection in the British herd was in 1992, when over 36,000 cows were found to be infected with BSE. Since then, the disease has been in steady decline. The research shows that the trend is inclined to continue downwards, with the British herd being clear of BSE by 2001, with the exception of a trickle of cases that will continue for an indeterminate time. But does Professor Anderson believe the results of his work justify the no-extended cull policy?
My own view is you should put the public health and safety issues first, and if you're convinced there is an association between BSE and the new CJD variant, then it would be desirable to take down the BSE epidemic as quickly as possible within given economic bounds. So what we did in our analysis, we created a scientific framework for the analysis and then analysed various options with different economic implications and epidemiological implications. And we listed the effect of each of these policies, and I believe that's our role. It is government's role to decide which policy it wants to put in place.
The thesis today is that we should give the highest priority to getting eradicate BSE. We can't reject this human transfer, particularly because it looks like the same lesions as in the BSE. It also is quite significant that the French people have been able to transfer BSE to monkeys and they've got the same sort of lesions as in humans. So you may say that it hasn't been proved. It hasn't been proved directly. But as scientists, I think, seeing no other possibility at this stage, would only reject that hypothesis at very great peril.
Professor John Bryn Owen is not alone in believing that the British government has not encouraged enough scientific research to assess the risks of BSE to public health.
I think where they have fallen down is that they haven't taken notice, as far as we can see, properly, of a wider base of advice. In fact, there has been really very little account taken of some of the people who have rather contrary views. And in fact, in retrospect, some of those views have been nearer the mark than the rather small and rather stable group of scientists that have been seemingly advising the government.
Now another country offers its insights into BSE. In Iceland, scientists have been studying scrapie, the BSE-like disease in sheep. Scrapie's been known for about 200 years, and much of what we know about BSE derives from work on scrapie. 20 years ago, in a program to eradicate scrapie in Iceland, herds of infected sheep were culled and the land restocked with uninfected sheep from areas known to be free of the disease. The sheep weren't fed any animal feed other than natural grass and hay, yet they too became infected with scrapie.
Since scrapie is endemic in sheep flocks in certain countries, such as Britain, that suggests there is some form, perhaps, of horizontal transmission. And the precise mode of that is uncertain at present, whether from studies in Iceland or studies from the UK. So that does leave the nagging doubt in your mind that there may be a component of horizontal transmission in BSE. The only argument I can put to you at the moment is we've searched desperately for it in the epidemiological data, and in particular we've looked at the rapid phase of decay in this epidemic over the last 4 years, and at present we can find no evidence from the experimental studies or evidence from the epidemiological database of its presence. That doesn't absolutely argue it's not there, it's just we can't detect it at present.
The Lancet is one of the world's leading medical science journals. It's played a major role in reporting the significant developments in the research on BSE and CJD, including the findings from Iceland and the new live test on CJD in America. In a recent editorial, The Lancet launched a scathing attack on the way the government has handled the research into CJD and BSE. The UK government's policies have led to the sacrifice of thousands of healthy cattle. They've also threatened the belief that UK scientists can respond adequately to a new infectious risk.
It's not meant